A Colorado law banning the use of conversion therapy on children is set to be reviewed by the Supreme Court. Conversion therapy is a controversial and discredited practice aiming to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity through counseling. It was brought on by Christian counselor Kaylee Childs. She says the ban infringes upon her First Amendment rights. We expect to hear oral arguments by the end of this year. 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor joins us now with more on this. Thanks for coming in.
Sure, good to be here.
This is really a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
So there were some complex legal arguments on both sides. Talk about that and what the Supreme Court will now consider.
Okay. Yeah, and it is complex because what you're looking at is whether this counselor, and she actually didn't have clients. She hadn't reached any harm. So she wasn't trying to impose conversion therapy, but she was like, I'm not able to do so, and that's a violation.
Proactively.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Preemptively, essentially. And so conversion therapy really is focused on children who are identify as homosexual or gender change, want to change their gender identity from what they were assigned at birth. And the conversion therapy is to try and bring them back. So it's to kind of discourage homosexuality and sexual orientation and that type of thing. And so here the question the court was looking at is whether a therapist who's trying to impose conversion therapy, is that a First Amendment protected speech, or is that just professional conduct that's being regulated just like a medical doctor might be regulated in what he or she could do? And so that was the legal issues. And at the lower court, at the trial court, and at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, they ruled on behalf of the state. They said, no, this is not First Amendment protected speech. The state can regulate this. And so the ban on conversion therapy in Colorado is still lawful.
So this is one of several Colorado cases addressing constitutional rights that have made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Would any of the rulings on those impact this one? Yeah,
Colorado's had a few cases recently that have went to the Supreme Court, the Masterpiece Cake, one being for sure one where the baker actually won who didn't want to make these cakes for homosexual couples, but that was on a technicality. The court really didn't rule on the substantive issue. But then just recently we had the case with the website designer. Right. And again, this was preemptive. She didn't have any homosexual couples coming to her saying, hey, we want you to design this wedding website. But the court nonetheless ruled that website design was her art. It was her expressive conduct, and therefore the state couldn't regulate it. So there they protected her, saying that was a First Amendment right, essentially, that was protected. So the court's been all over, but I think recently we're seeing, not just from the Colorado cases, from these First Amendment religious cases, we're seeing an expansion of that religious protection.
Well, it's so interesting because the Supreme Court accepts very few cases each year. Why do you think they decided to take this one on?
Right. So the way you get to the Supreme Court, you're guaranteed a right to go to an appellate court, a federal appellate court, but you have to file a writ of certiorari to get to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court accepts very few cases. So I think last year there were over 1,000 writs filed, and they accepted less than 100. Wow. So chances are you're not going to get there. The reason the court accepted this is because there's what's called a split in the circuits. So you have the 9th and 10th Court of Appeals ruling that this is not protected speech, but then you have the 3rd and 11th Circuit saying it is protected speech. So depending on where you're practicing, in some instances you could do conversion therapy, in other states you wouldn't be able to. So this is where the court said, all right, we're going to take this case. All of these different cases are dealing with the same issue, and we're going to issue a ruling. And when the Supreme Court issues that ruling, that's going to then be binding on everyone. So it will resolve this split in the circuit.
Are we seeing a trend at the Supreme Court related to religious freedoms and First Amendment issues?
Yes, we are seeing a trend for sure, and I think that trend is to expand some of those religious freedoms. And we do have in the First Amendment, there's the anti-establishment and the free exercise clause. So it says the government is not supposed to sort of declare or endorse a religion, and it's also not supposed to infringe on your free exercise of that. But what you're seeing recently is cases where, for example, private religious schools are getting public funding. And some will argue, well, wait a second, you're actually helping to establish this religion by giving these public funds. And so there's an argument that that's unconstitutional and it's overly broad, but with this conservative court, I think we're going to see more of that. And I think they're going to continue to expand some of those religious rights. And some of the people are concerned that, hey, this goes against the separation of church and state and the First Amendment. But this is the conservative court. This is kind of the direction I think we're headed.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens with the conversion therapy law heading to the Supreme Court. I'm sure you'll be watching it. As always, Whitney, thank you so much.
Okay, good to be here.